Promise Road, Hinterlands, Flocking, Peeing in the Creek, Skid Marks, The Man with the Gun, Bowden/Storyteller, The Difference Between Cross Country and Football, The Craziest Guy in School, Plans to Kiss Butt. As we made our way through town on that first day of practice, out toward the farm roads where we did much of our training, Bowden kept his silence. 7 runners, Bowden, the 5 freshmen on our team, and a chubby, slow kid named Sidney Porter, a.k.a. Squid, slowly plodded out, sweating, soaking up the heat bouncing up off the bone-white pavement. As we ran farther and farther out, the houses crept back from the road. They looked lonelier, smaller, and rougher in appearance than the quaint little homes we'd left behind in town. It should be said, rural to me as a kid always somehow equated to immorality. Dark goings-on out in the sticks, murder and incest. I think the movie The Texas Chainsaw Massacre had a lot to do with this perception. Not that I'd actually seen it. As the road grew narrower and the sidewalks disappeared, the cars that passed us, although fewer in number, seemed to have slight regard for our safety. They blasted hot air into us, and their tires kicked up dust and small rocks, causing us to edge off the road when they hurtled past. After 10 minutes or so of slogging, we were truly into farmland. Out here in what we would come to call the hinterlands, the road deteriorated. Brittle, crumbling edges narrowed the tarmac, and small, volcanic-looking potholes ran down the center. Promise Road was straight and flat, with 4 black tar-like strips disappearing into the hazy distance, seas of green fields on each side. The tires of pickups and cars made an ominous ripping sound as they blasted past us. When vehicles weren't threatening us, invisible waves of humidity ebbed and flowed from out of the emerald fields on both sides like hot, wet ghosts. We bluebirds huddled tight together as we ran, Bowden leading us by just a few feet. Our tightness as a pack had something instinctive about it. There was something primal going on, something that had to do with survival. It seemed Slade's treatment of me and Coach's apparent lack of concern about it had affected all of us bluebirds. We were officially scared. About 3 miles out of town, the continuous walls of flickering green corn at the sides were interrupted by a sad little crumbling bridge which squeezed the already narrow road to one lane. The bridge spanned an anemic trickle of a creek. Small, gnarled trees arched above the creek in a canopy. Bowden stopped on the far side, and we abruptly came to a stuttering halt. All of us nearly running into him, we were packed so tightly together. "This is where it happened," he said. Then he inexplicably turned and stepped off the road, down towards the creek. I followed him, thinking that was what bluebirds were supposed to do, follow their designated senior leader, when Bowden pulled down the front of his shorts and began pissing onto some bright green poison ivy. After almost running into his backside, I quickly shielded my eyes, did an about-face, and headed back to the road, where I found my fellow freshman dripping sweat, nervously waiting for Bowden to come back from peeing. "Dumbass," muttered my brother in embarrassment. "Just over there," said Bowden, as he returned from relieving himself, still adjusting his shorts unconsciously. "Up this road about 100 meters or so. That's where it went down." Now, I don't know if Bowden knew what he was doing, if he was a superb storyteller and a bit of a tease, or if he was just so laid back he didn't realize he was building suspense. But he left us hanging like that, not telling us what had gone down. He just stared up the road, watching the scene he was imagining play out in his head, until Adam Keene asked the obvious question. "That's where what went down?" said Keene. Bowden smiled a smile that makes me think he must have known what he was doing all along, and said, "That's where Jeff Slade nearly beat a man to death with the man's own gun." Then he crouched down, retied a shoelace, stood back up, and said, "Well, we better keep going. You bluebirds are supposed to get in at least 6 today." But we didn't return to our planned workout. We just walked up the country road, all 7 of us. He continued his silence, requiring us to speak up and ask questions. My brother spoke up this time. Well, what happened? What went down? Then Bowden got into true storyteller mode, and we didn't have to ask anymore. It was a warm night, just a month or so ago, he said as we were all walking. Slade's been freaking out about you guys. He's been training like a fiend all summer long. Been getting in 70, 80 miles a week, doing 2-a-days on his own. We arrived at a spot on the bone-colored road where a pair of long black skid marks stretched out before us. This is where it happened, said Bowden, his eyes down on the tire tracks. He stopped and we all stopped behind him. One thing you guys ought to know about Slade, Bowden said conspiratorially. He's nervous as hell. He gets all wound up and he can't shake a thought. You guys need to remember that about him. And, he raised a finger in the air to make the point extra clear, when he's that way, you guys just need to stay the hell away. He chuckled a little. He glanced at all of us in turn. Well, even more than normal. His face grew serious again. That's the way he was on that night. He was all worked up, probably thinking about you guys. My earlier longing to join the football team and sit the bench became more than a simple whim at this point. Now it seemed less like a good idea and more like a necessity for survival. So, Slade goes out for a long run, a 9 or 10 miler, even though he's already got 12 in for the day. It's nearly midnight, but he just takes off and heads out here. He said there was a full moon, it was easy to see, but I wonder if the guy in the truck really meant to hit him or not. He looked up into the sky. See how there's no street lamps out here or anything? And who'd be looking for a runner or a walker way out here at midnight? An oafish, good-natured kid we came to call Popeye because one of his eyes was nearly squinted shut all the time said, Nobody. And we all stared at our fellow bluebird, embarrassed for him at his misunderstanding of the rhetorical question, and our own association with him, however recent and tenuous. But Bowden didn't care. He was a cool guy. So Slade's out here running, and this guy in a jacked-up pickup truck comes hauling ass up the road. Slade says he can hear him coming. You know how those big off-road tires buzz. But he's got just as much right to the road as anyone, right? So he stays out of the high grass and keeps to the side of the road like normal. Then the guy gets right up on him. He's not slowing down one bit. Slade even says he sped up. Says the guy tried to hit him. I don't know what it was, but a little switch somewhere in me flicked at about this time, and I knew I wasn't going to quit the cross-country team. Maybe it wasn't Slade. Maybe it was Bowden, the kind and cool way he had with us freshmen. Maybe it was Coach and his cursing. In any case, by the time we all got back from our run into the country, I'd changed and wanted nothing to do with football. One thing I was sure of was that the freshmen on the football team, most of them standing around watching practice while wearing their hot helmets and pads, standing there silently while other guys ran one minutely dissected play after another, weren't hearing a story like the one we were getting, and they never would. Bowden went on. The guy's rearview mirror flicks up against Slade's shirt, and he always wears these shirts that he rips the sides out of, and it catches and it tears the shirt right off. Clean the hell off. Slade's shirt is now hanging on the guy's rearview mirror. No way, murmured Popeye. Way, said Bowden. His eyes got wide. Anyway, Slade screams at him. Get back here, you dirty mother, he yells. And the guy jams on his brakes and stops and opens his door. And Slade says he sees a gun rack. Then the guy pulls a shotgun off the rack, clacks it, gets out of the truck, and starts walking towards Slade. Dude, said Squid, the only non-freshman on the team unworthy of being a hawk or an eagle. Those tracks are where he slammed on his brakes. No, man, Bowden said with a knowing smile. Just let me tell it. These aren't his tracks from where he slammed on his brakes. He pointed back towards where we'd come from at a short pair of black skid marks. Those are the tracks from where he slammed on his brakes. These, he said, pointing down at a pair of much longer black marks, are from where he took off. Squid looked like he didn't quite get all of that, But I did. My fear and my admiration for Slade were both growing exponentially. The guy is coming at Slade, right? He's got his gun in both of his hands across his chest, and he's moving towards him, saying, "Did you just yell at me, you lunatic?" But, Bowden grinned here, what he doesn't know is who he's dealing with. Bowden pointed up the road, and we followed him up to where the tracks finally faded, and the road was again unmarked. We stood there, all 7 of us, including Bowden, and stared down at the last faint remnants of rubber on the road. This is where the guy's tires stopped spinning when he peeled out, trying to get away from Slade. We then made a small circle around the end of the marks, staring down at them like a bunch of junior detectives. The dude, said Bowden, should have noticed something was wrong when Slade didn't back up or hold up his hands or something when the dude was walking toward him with the gun. I mean, from how Slade tells it, he was running at the guy the whole time, and he never stopped running. By the time Slade was on him, I guess the guy had some sense he'd messed with the wrong man. But by then, Bowden smiled. It was too late. Slade, according to legend, had snatched the gun out of the man's hands and had begun beating him with it before the man knew what was happening. He had beaten him, slapping and whacking him on his shoulders and back, all the way back to his truck, and after the guy crawled into the cab and shifted it into gear to get away, Slade had chased and battered the sides and tailgate of the truck with the stock of the gun until he couldn't keep up with it anymore. According to Bowden, he then threw the gun into the cornfield, turned around, ran home, drank half a gallon of Gatorade, and slept like a baby. "You can keep the shirt," Bowden smiled. That's what Slade yelled as the guy drove off into the night. As we made our way back to town, we were, strangely, a lot less scared than we had been on our way out. We ran in a spread-out line, filling the country road, owning it, you might say. We talked loudly and laughed often. Bowden smiled at us and answered our questions. He ran with us, not in front of us. The thing was, somewhere along the way, we had all decided that the craziest, meanest, scariest guy in the school was on our side. He was one of us. Bowden in his storytelling had, without saying it, somehow made that clear. Still, I realized the predicament I was in. Slade still hated me. I had resolved nothing. I decided when we went to get shoes that afternoon, I was going to get the same brand and model that just Slade wore, whether they felt good or not. In every subtle way I could conceive of, I intended to kiss some serious ass for as long as it took to get Slade to like me.